Welcome to When Last We Left Our Heroes. Actually, this is the first session, and so we have to start at the very beginning, or in fact, before the beginning. So the correct thing to say would be, when first we find our heroes. If you've been following my videos, you'll know that the first thing that I did with these players after a session 0, setting expectations, getting everyone on the same page, was to do solo backstory sessions. So every player ended up getting about 2 sessions that were probably an hour and a half to 2.5 hours each. I think they each total played for roughly 5 hours before it was all said and done, maybe 4 hours, something like that, for each solo backstory. And so we are going to start with Phaedra Rosenquist, played by Virgil. Phaedra is an elven woman, a wild magic barbarian, but she starts her adventure at level 1. Phaedra's home has been raided and burned to the ground when she was just a small girl, and the circumstances of that will play out a little bit over the campaign, but there was a small child who seemed to be ordering around a group of gnolls or demons of some sort and destroying this town, probably seeking something in specific. We'll figure out what later on. And then, having run away and successfully fled despite the destruction of her whole town and the death of her whole family, Phaedra was adopted by a nearby hermit couple of tieflings. She grew up and spent her life with them until they passed away, and then she set out into the world to seek her adventure and revenge. Having returned back to her home, she found nothing but a burned out, destroyed old ruin. She hadn't been there since its destruction, and it had been overgrown. Nothing much to note, except for picking up an old medallion of her mother's, as well as encountering a zombie in the town. She was attacked and ambushed by a former townsperson and had to defeat a friend. In the process, she was bitten by this zombie. And this is where we'll step out of the story for just a moment. Zombie bites in D&D 5e don't actually do anything. However, that is counter to every other piece of zombie lore ever. And I thought that'd be a really cool thing to interact with, is dealing with getting rid of zombie bite. And so, in normal lore, zombies are made with necromancy, not by a disease, but in every other piece of fiction, zombies are made by spreading a disease. And so I wanted to sort of combine those two a little bit. And there was a ranger nearby who sort of was watching the whole thing from the shadows, and he popped out and was like, "Hey, have you been bitten?" Phaedra was like, yeah, gesturing to her arm. And so the ranger was like, great, another one. All right, come on. And so this friendly ranger took Phaedra to the nearby town and met with his guild, the Wild Wardens, to find a cure for her. And this accomplished several things that I wanted to do in my solo one-shots. I wanted to introduce people to an ally, somebody that they knew. Also, a faction. Just meet a faction in the world. These Wild Wardens, this group of rangers. Now Phaedra knows them. I also wanted to sort of give them a bit of an objective, and that's where the Wild Wardens said, "Hey, we helped you out here. We gave you an antidote to this, no charge, but we have a situation. Somebody went missing and we don't have that many people to spare. Could you go check it out? It's in the town of Glennon." Remember that name, because that's where our adventure starts. It's in the town of Glennon. There's been a bunch of trees dying, something weird going on. We sent somebody to investigate, haven't heard from him since. Just go find that person. You don't have to solve the problem. Just go find out what happened to that guy. We don't know what happened to him, and we need our dude back. So Phaedra sets out, meets some other people along the way, arrives in Glennon, meets a few townsfolk, talks to people, asks around a little bit, and then goes and investigates what's going on in the woods, and there's some sort of mysterious floating prismatic crystal thing just chilling out in the woods that is somehow seems to be causing the death of everything in this vicinity. It's just sort of hovering off the ground, just sort of floating there. She can't move it or really interact with it. But when she attacks it, she passes through it completely, seeming to interact with some sort of strange taste in her mouth and a feeling in her body, shrugging and shaking it off. She goes back to town. During the night that she spends in town, she is ambushed along with the rest of the town by a group of gnolls. See, one of the things that has been happening, the villagers would be able to tell her, is that there had been sort of gnolls spotted in the woods nearby and various attacks on the homesteads at the outskirts of town. Nothing immediate or scary just yet, but a looming threat. Well, this group of gnolls seemed to have gathered their courage and ambushed the town at night. Phaedra, unfortunately, was knocked unconscious by the gnolls and saw no more. So this was Phaedra's solo backstory. She got to do a lot of things. She met some villains along her journeys. She met some allied factions, some interesting NPCs. She interacted with the central tension. At one point, she faced the moral quandary of, okay, we have some orcs that ambushed us on our travels, and we've captured them. What do we do with captured enemies? Do we kill them because they're bad guys? Do we let them go? Do we turn them into local authorities somehow? So she was faced with that quandary. She ended up letting them go, trying to scare them out of their life of banditry, and we'll see how successful she was. But it was an interesting choice that she had to make. So that was it for Phaedra's solo backstory. Next we had the player Chris playing Hildorn, the Elven Fey Wanderer Ranger, again starting at level 1, so they don't have their subclasses until afterwards. They all started at level 1, and through their solo adventures we got them to level 3, and then they all started together at level 3. Hildorn has been all over the place and is sort of an older, a little bit jaded and cynical, but trying to lighten up sort of a character, very a la The Witcher. In stark contrast to Phaedra's naivete and brand new eyes looking at the world and sort of blind optimism, Hildorn is world weary, seen some things, done some things. Unfortunately, the town that he was from was leveled by a dragon, destroying everyone he knew and killing his wife. It was sort of the cause of one of the new village leaders had done some things to tick off the local dragon, and so Hildorn has a bit of a grudge, but also doesn't know what happened to this person or the dragon. Had to return to the elven ancestral homeland of Beltalay, lived there for a while, and has since started to wander again, feeling that call to help and save and figure, while I'm here, I'm going to see if I can change one more life. And he's doing his best to live out his wife's dying wish for him to be more empathetic, grow in empathy of creatures different to or even potentially dangerous to himself. And so Hildorn has an interesting interaction. Sort of one of the central themes of this campaign is this idea of us versus them, and who is us and who is them. There are good guys and bad guys, and who are they? How do we tell who they are? Just by their looks or by their deeds, by where they live? There's a lot of different factors at play, and so Hildorn is trying his best to save everyone. And as you know, in a world with fraught danger and morality, it's hard to save everyone. So it's going to be an adventure for Hildorn to learn who can he save and who should he save. Hildorn has been hired in his course of just seeing the world and doing things, needs to make some coin. He's been hired by a group called the Couriers to deliver some mail to the Wall. Now, the Wall is a gigantic installation, maybe 1,000 feet high and hundreds of miles long, a couple 100 feet wide, and it separates the east from the west in my campaign setting. In the east, there are many civilized nations, the sapient humanoid creatures that we know and love and find in the player's handbook, and to the east, especially the northeast, we find the more dangerous or wild things. Mordor-type lands, there's places with orcs and drow and wandering savage nations there, and so this wall, the Durst wall, separates the east and the west, and there's a encampment of soldiers there, and Hildorn is just gonna go deliver some mail. Well, he arrives there at the wall, and he has seen that part of the wall has been destroyed, actually. This is a remnant from, actually, the end of my last campaign, where the undead Titan Karshimus wreaked destruction on the world. One of the things the Titan did is blasted a hole in this wall, and it has been several decades of people trying to repair the wall, but it's slow going, because the wall was made by a precursor civilization, the Grey Elves, who had superior magic and technology to the people today before they were killed off by the dragons in a dope war. But that is deep background lore that does not affect Hildorn right now as he makes his way up to the wall. He had some interactions with the soldiers, was passing along some mail, met with the commander to deliver a note to him personally. And then in sort of an interaction, he hears that there's some orcs that are stopped at the gate. They're trying to come in from the east, the bad side, to the west, the good side. And nobody in the group speaks any Orcish. They seem to be speaking some sort of broken Elvish, and none of these humans speak Elvish. Well, Hildorn is an elf and says, I might be able to help out. So he goes down to translate, and as it turns out, from the broken understanding that he has, these orcs are refugees. They're on the run from some terrible thing that has pushed them out of their homelands. They're just trying to live somewhere peacefully, but the east is dangerous, and this guy who's leading the orcs just wants to get his people to safety. Hildorn relays that, but the commander at the wall has his own ideas for us versus them, and decides that Haven, the country that they're in, doesn't need any more mouths to feed, and everyone would be better off if this group of orcish refugees disappeared. And so in front of Hildorn, this commander commits atrocious war crimes and murders all of the refugees. This gives Hildorn a bad guy in the world. This commander is not a good person. Obviously, he thinks what he's doing is probably right for his country, but that does not make it so. And so Hildorn sort of keeps his mouth shut and goes off, and before he leaves, he's pulled aside by a captain, a lower-ranking officer who says, I don't think that the barons, the people in charge of Haven, know what's going on here, or the dukes who are above the barons. Could you get word to somebody and let them know what's going on? If it's the barons and the dukes' will that this is happening, then okay. But if it's just Commander Hawthorne who is going rogue, that's not cool. And so Hildorn agrees and will pass a note on to the local duke when he sort of makes his way through that town. So Hildorn continues his travels. Unfortunately, he is ambushed by this poisonous snake, and as his hit points and life are just ebbing away from him, having successfully killed the creature but is about to die to its poison, in his blurry vision, he sees this little white creature who comes up and sort of boops him real quick on the nose and seems to cure his wounds. And he sees this skittish little creature. It's got these barely budding antlers and a deer-like face, but the rest of its body seems sort of furred and fox-like with a big bushy tail. It's about the size of a house cat. And through an extended process, he woos this creature and convinces it to hang out with him. This is his familiar, his pet. One of the things that I do is I give all rangers an animal companion that is way less garbage than the Beastmaster, because I think that's a cool thing. I like niche protection, and I'm just like, you know what? All rangers get an animal companion that's a very ranger-like thing. Let's do that and have all rangers just get a beast friend. And so he has this little deer fox, a little fey creature. Hildorn is a fey wanderer, or at least he's going to be, and so he's very interested in fey things, and thought that was an interesting experience. During the course of his travels, trying to find the local duke, he comes across some gnolls who actually captured this creature of his little deer fox, and he slays the gnolls, overheard them mentioning something about going to Glennon, meeting up with a larger team there. And so in the inevitable situation when he finds the crossroads between going to the Duke or going to the town of Glennon to warn them about incoming danger, his little deer fox friend is pretty insistent. We gotta go stop those people that tried to kill and capture me. And now obviously he doesn't say it in so many words because he's a deer fox, but he was much cuter and he's very fun to play. And so Hildorn and his deer fox travel to the town of Glennon, start to warn them of the danger coming and learn about the greater situation going on, the threat that these gnolls pose. And in that course, trying to warn the town, one evening, as I'm sure you can guess, there was an ambush, and the gnolls sort of started to ravage the whole town, burning things down, and in the skirmish, in the melee, Hildorn was knocked unconscious, and that was the last that he knew. So that is Hildorn's backstory. He finds himself knocked unconscious, captured by the gnolls, still with lots of things to do, having met lots of people in the world, but now with a specific grudge against these gnolls. So our final solo session is Jimmy playing Bria the Spindle, a human bard, one of the subclasses from Tasha's, like Glamour, I think. One of the quick-witted ones. I think it's the Glamour bard. And Bria has an interesting sort of situation here. Bria is the bastard daughter of a baron towards the west of Haven, on the far side of the country. And Bria decides to run away from that situation and find herself sort of seeking story and adventure. She has fallen in love with story and decided that she is wanting to find out what the best stories are, tell them. She's got a little bit of a Gilderoy Lockhart thing where she is willing to take stories as her own, twist the details, but it's all about, it's not necessarily about being deceptive, but it's about the theater, the drama of it, telling the best story that she can. And so she sets out for, the east of Haven, far away from her home, pragmatically, but also towards where things are happening. There's adventure. There's stuff happening in the east of Haven, near the wall, near the eastern lands. And so she decides what's going on over there. And one of the things that she does in her travels is she, gives a little song and dance in exchange for a place to stay, a roof over her head, a meal to eat in various towns and villages across the country. And in one such place, she encounters somebody who says, "Hey, that wasn't a bad story. Let me hire you. I would like you to go and find a story. There's a specific story that I've been hearing about. There's a local farmer who supposedly battled and slew an owl bear all by himself. That sounds like an interesting tale. I want you to tell me about it, okay? Go and get this story for me. It's one of the things that I do is I collect stories, and I want you to go and get this one for me." Well, that is right up Bria's alley, and so she quickly says yes. Her patron says, "Hang on, before you go, just so you're aware, we have enemies. I have enemies. Someone who we do not like because they are not interested in the truth of the story. They're interested in using stories to manipulate the public. They are the Avalanche, basically the local tabloids that are spreading all over the country, and they use information to manipulate, to gain political power, to instill fear, to twist the truth of events. But they are the large news force, And because they're the only news force, they're the one everyone is listening to. And so this person says, hey, we don't like them. We have a bit of integrity. Obviously, do whatever you need to do to get the story, and you can change some details, but we need to preserve the truth of the story. And there is a very big difference between us and the Avalanche. Sort of her patron, Lady Valancourt, who is a noble, and that nobility thing will come up for sure in the us versus them type stuff. But the noble sort of says, I don't care if you have to lie about details around the story, just be true to the story itself. The Avalanche doesn't really even care about the truth of the story. They just twist all the details around the story while keeping the frame as honest as possible so that it seems real, but the meat of the story is misleading. Lady Valancourt doesn't care about the frame as long as the picture of the story is intact and artful. And there is a distinct difference between those two things. And so Bria decides to set out to this new town. It's just the next town over. This sort of seems like a tutorial test for her to see if she's capable of getting the bigger and better stories. In her travels one evening, a falling star drops from the sky in a nearby field, and so she goes to investigate and see what that's about. She finds two different farmers arguing over who saw it first and whose land it was on, and a third different sort of stable boy saying maybe it belongs to the local duke because it's all on his land. And there was sort of this three-way argument about what we should do with this piece of star metal that has fallen from the ground. Bria snuck up on the group and used her cunning, guile, and magic to put them all to sleep, pick up the hunk of star metal, and run away, leaving them to have sort of solved this argument. If there's no star metal, there's nothing to argue about, right? She takes this chunk of star metal, knowing that really only the elves work in star metal, and so she needs to find an elven smith to see if she can do something with this. But it was an interesting situation she had to figure out her way around and through. And so then sort of the following day, she arrives in the next village over, asks around, finds out who this farmer is, and then she encounters the most boring story told by the most boring person ever. It was truly a delight to hype this story up as something crazy, and then this negative a million charisma farmer just being like, yeah, it was the coolest thing ever. There was an owl bear off on the other side of my property, and I was like, ah, go away, owl bear. And it sort of looked at me and then shambled around for a few minutes and then walked into the woods, and I defeated it all on my own because I'm so brave and amazing. It was a truly outstanding story. The anticlimax of it was just chef's kiss. So good. And so as a result of this, Bria comes back and shares the story with her patron, sort of embellishing as much as she can, but keeping true to the story. It was a garbage story. And that turned out to be sort of a test from Lady Valancourt to see if Lady Valancourt already knew this story, but she was trying to see if Bria would lie about the details or would include things to make it more interesting or listenable, just to see how she would respond to this challenge. Would she include her own travels and journey? And so after giving sort of a few feedback and pointers, Valancourt said, fantastic, I'm going to make you sort of a honorary court member of my family crest. And she later finds out is the Duke of this region, Duke Argyle, but she doesn't know necessarily her involvement or relationship to that. So Bria is now an auxiliary member of the court of the Duke of Argyle, sort of in service of this Lady Valancourt. She is sent off to Glennon, which is supposedly being harried and ambushed by gnolls, and there's lots of things going on because it's very close to the wall near the mountains that separate the east and the west. And so she says, go over there and figure out what's going on. And there's a lot going on in that town, but make sure you tell me all about your journey to and from, but also what's happening in the town. How does it end? Is it a tragedy? Is everybody in the town die? Are there heroes that rise up and save the town? Is it a tale of woe where everyone needs to abandon their homes and save their lives? What happens? Do people stay behind? Do they fight? Do they flee? What goes on? And so if you have to, you can go east of the wall and figure out what drove the gnolls here. But do whatever you need to. Whenever you want to check in, that's fine. But go and gather this story for me. And so that's where Bria travels across a few days to Glennon to figure out what's going on there, asking around, talking to different people, gathering people's stories, hearing about the townsfolk, what they're doing to prepare, what they're worried about. And then one evening, as I'm sure you once again have figured out, gnolls ambush the town and capture Bria. And of course, that is where our session is going to begin, with all of the PCs having gathered in Glennon for their own various reasons, assaulted and ambushed by gnolls, captured and held prisoner by them as well. So that was our pre-session 1 adventures, solo adventures that the players all had. They all met an NPC ally, they all interacted with a faction, they formed an enemy, they have a hook into the main story, they interacted with the central tension, they faced a moral quandary, they went to different places. These were all things that I wanted to accomplish as a result of these solo sessions. And so the players all got to do lots of different things, so it's interesting to see going forward, how are they going to interact with each other, their own quests, how are they going to form as a party. It'll be fun to figure out how do I get them to do that. But anyways, that is it for this first sort of pre-episode of When Last We Left Our Heroes. Thank you all for listening. We are going to keep doing these. We're going to sort of try to get them out every week because I play every week, and these are a lot lower production intensity. Obviously, I'm still going to be making other videos. These are a lot easier to edit and put together if there's no video component to them. But we're going to try to play every week, and so I'll try to get these out every week. Obviously, there might be some gaps because sometimes we might not play. People have real life schedules. I might get busy, but I will do my best to keep up with these. If you're interested in continuing listening to these, obviously the engagement really lets me know if these are things people want. So comment and share them around, talk about them on the internet. But otherwise, I think I will keep making these just because the story is interesting and it's a fun thing to do and catalog the adventures of my game. So hopefully, it's been very story heavy. Hopefully there'll be more lessons as we're going forward, but who knows? It might just be this is what's been going on. So if you are interested, great. Thank you all for watching. Nope, that's wrong. Nope, let's try it again. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time.